Hey y'all, welcome back to the TXRF podcast. This is officially episode 9, and I think this is the longest episode to date, the longest actual episode that is, because I had the weird game 162 thing where I just uploaded the audio from that live stream. But this was a great discussion today with Tyler Henderson, who works for the Nolan Wrighton website, writes for them. And among other things, I'm going to let him introduce himself at the beginning of the podcast here. But I actually used one of his articles in a video of mine, and he happened to see the video. So he reached out to me, and then I invited him on here because who better to talk about baseball with than someone who reports about it pretty often. So it was a really great time. We had some technical difficulties throughout, as you'll notice when I jump back in and say what happened. So my Wi-Fi cut out 4 times, I think, 3 or 4 times. So that caused the Zoom call to crash, and it was a little bit of a struggle, but we got through it, and ultimately it was a great time talking about Rangers baseball. So I'll say it again at the end, but be sure to go follow Tyler, check out his stuff. But first, you got to listen to what he's got to say on here, because we covered a lot of things. We talked about the Hall of Fame, the MLB Draft coming up, talked about what the Rangers might do after the lockout, talked about the lockout itself. I mean, we covered a lot here, so it was a great conversation. Definitely want to have him back on here in the future. Hopefully next time we talk, it will be about this lockout ending. So we'll see, but huge thanks to him for coming on the show, and I will let y'all enjoy the segment with him. All right, y'all. So today I have a very special guest joining us, Tyler Henderson. And Tyler, do you want to go ahead and tell the people a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, man. Appreciate you having me on this morning. So I have been a Rangers, I don't want to call it a beat writer, but a Rangers writer for Nolan Wrighton, the fan-sided branch, for the Texas Rangers here for about 3 years. Recently married. We've been married about 6 months now, and I got my degree in journalism, and right now I'm working for the local TV station in West Texas as their agriculture reporter, doing a little bit of sports when I can. Loving every minute of it. Loving every minute of it, and I'm just glad to be here. And I love these Texas Rangers, and hopefully with the additions they made this offseason, more to come. I mean, hopefully we see a better season from them this year.
Yeah, for sure, man. And I appreciate you coming on as well. As some of y'all who watch my videos may know, I have used a couple of Tyler's articles in the past before, so I figured it's only fitting to get him on here to chat some baseball. But before we get into the things we wanted to mainly discuss today, I wanted to cover some of the recent news here. As of a couple days ago, the Rangers promoted Brett Hayes to the bullpen coach position, and they also hired Seth Connor as an assistant hitting coach. So those are 2 additional great moves as they continue to finalize their coaching staff. And another article from yesterday from Chris, is it Halicki, I think? I don't know if I said that right, Tyler.
Chris Halleck, I think.
Chris Halleck. Okay. We will go with that for now. Sorry, Chris. I'll ask you on Twitter later. But he posted that MLB is reportedly preparing a new CBA proposal. This was an article from The Athletic. And there's really not much else to say about it right now, but he took the approach of analyzing it from the experience of the NBA, who has had, I think it's 3 or 4 lockouts in the last 30 years. And they have had to miss a couple games because of it. So ultimately, MLB needs to get it together and not miss any games, because after the last 2 seasons with COVID and everything else, they cannot afford to miss any unnecessary games over things like money. And also the Rangers just spent $500 million. So I'd like to see those players play.
One of the big things they're trying to hit home is the revenue sharing that the teams are willing to tank. But if you look at the 3rd worst team in baseball, like you said, going out and spend $500 million, I mean, those lower level teams, those bottom of the barrel teams, are willing to spend. But when you've got teams like the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Red Sox, the high payroll teams, I mean, you look at them and they don't really give the little guys a chance to play at the top of the market. The Rangers are an exception this year. I mean, that was kind of their goal. But, as far as looking at the monetary value of all this, I mean, the players make the money. The players come out. They're what drives the revenue for them. And so if the players don't play, there's no money being made. It's a lose-lose for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the last podcast I did, like the whole thing, I just went on a huge rant about all of that because, like you said, at the end of the day, the players make the money. So if the players aren't happy, they can just say, we're not going to play, and then no one gets any money. That's like the extreme scenario, though. So I don't think that will happen. But I don't care what happens. I just don't want them to miss any games over something like that, because it's just stupid.
Right. And what's happening now is both teams, or I guess both sides here, are talking past each other. That gap is so divided between the players' union and the league. I mean, it's like they're both talking to the wall behind the other guy. And I mean, at this point, nothing's going to get done. We could see a delayed spring training, if not miss games. But I think, like you made mention of, I mean, the worst case scenario here is like the 94 strike. I don't think we see that. These guys want to play. They want to get paid. So I think we'll see games, whether it's on time or not. I mean, that's still up in the air. But these guys have to get some dialogue going on some of these major topics,
Definitely. And it just comes down to talking about it, because they're not even doing that much. There's a lot they won't agree on, but they just need to all sit down, whether it's physically or in a Zoom call or whatever, and just talk it out at least once a week, because they've done nothing in almost a month, I think.
And Marcus Simeon went on Chris Rose's podcast for John Boy Media not too long ago, and they made some interesting points. I don't know if you got to see it, but for your listeners who haven't seen it, I mean, it's free to watch. I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube. It's about an hour long. It's Lucas Giolito, Zach Britton, and Marcus Simeon talking about their perspective as player reps and members of the players union for each one of their respective teams. It's pretty interesting insight from their point of view, and they're frustrated just like we are. So.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. Actually, I didn't know that, even though I follow all the John Boy Media stuff. But that's the kind of stuff that the union and the owners need to be listening to actually see what the players want. Because the people that run the union, I don't know this for sure, but to me, it seems like they're not fully going with what the players want. They're just kind of doing with what the union wants, and then the owners are just in a completely different universe. So it's a mess for sure.
And, I understand wanting to get paid earlier. And like we've seen in the last couple of years, I mean, Correa hit free agency at 26. You're looking at Seager, who signed the 10-year, $325 million with the Rangers. He's 27. These guys are getting paid younger, which is leaving the veteran players like your Andrew McCutcheons, guys like that who have been around a while. I mean, they're left without jobs because they can settle for a younger guy at league minimum. That's what they're trying to avoid. And I agree with that. There's still some value in those older players, but it's that fine line that they're not willing to, step up to. And whether we see this happen here in the next month, we hope it comes together quickly, but we're not in their minds. So we'll see what happens.
No, exactly. And that's another thing. I think they should, at least what they can legally say, they should be transparent with the fans, because the fans also produce some income. They give the money to the teams to get tickets, to get the merchandise. They completely wiped all the MLB websites from any current players right now. So there is a huge loss of income. Like, I wanted to go order a Corey Seager jersey online because I'm not in the area to go get one right now, and I can't. There's nowhere to get any of the new and current jerseys and any of the merchandise. So it's really disappointing.
I'll say this, the players are handling it pretty well, I think. I mean, as far as comic relief, you look on Twitter and all of them have changed their their profile pictures to the gray outline of the player. I think they're handling it okay. I think Dane Dunning put some ski goggles on his guy, something like that. They're having fun with it, but like you're saying, the fans who want to see these players for the Rangers, Marcus Semien, Corey Seager, John Gray, Cole Calhoun, maybe. I don't know. There's probably some Cole Calhoun fans out there, but I mean, I want to see these guys in our uniform. We didn't pay them $325 million, $175 million to not see them in our uniform. So come on, they got to get it together, and hopefully we see it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and to wrap this part up, I will say I feel confident for the wrong reason, and that is that the owners are so money hungry that they will not want to miss any games. So I think they're going to come up with something before spring training, hopefully, but certainly before opening day. And depending on how things pan out in the next few months, if COVID restrictions are lessened, then teams will certainly want to jump on that and get some ticket revenue going.
One more thing before we move on here is what's often left out is the minor league portion of all this. The minor leaguers still have access to the major league clubhouses, the coaching staff, things like that. So you're looking at guys like Leiter, Young, Wynn. These guys are still going to be able to go to spring training on time, get their workouts in, still have that key development time, even if the major league side doesn't see it. And for the Rangers, I mean, that's a pretty important factor when you look at the next 2, 3, 4 years of this team's success.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because I do always like to mention that minor leaguers don't get paid enough. And that is probably something they should include in a CBA deal. Maybe not this time because it's already ugly as it is, but in the future, they got to really work on upping the pay, because some guys in low A, even double A, apart from their signing bonus, which probably goes away faster than people would think, they get paid almost nothing. And they got to go on these long bus rides. They don't have access to these private jets and stuff like some MLB teams do when you're at that level. They all got to take the bus, 12 plus hour long drives, play a game, turn around, do it again. I mean, they work hard and don't get paid enough.
I think the guys like in the system, there's some really good players in Double A. One guy I've written about before is Blaine Krim. I said he could be the next right-handed Max Muncy. A guy like him, he was taken in the 19th round with the pick 565. That dude didn't make any money, and so he's having to work a part-time job, maybe a full-time job in the offseason just to sustain his family and his needs. And I mean, if these guys are professional athletes, I think you should treat them as professional athletes.
I fully agree. And if their excuse is that they can't afford it, then cut down the number of teams or something. Still allow the guys to be on teams, just have less teams because that's less cost. But that reminds me as well of the guy on the Twins a couple years ago. I don't remember his name, but it was a big thing with him because he was like working an Uber job during spring training or something, and they were kind of making light of it. But in my mind, I was thinking, that's not a good thing. It's funny, but it's not a good thing that he has to work anything else at all on top of being a full-time athlete. So exactly like you said, they gotta get it going on that.
Yeah, you're thinking of Randy Dobnak, the starting pitcher. He had the really good mustache, the old 80s handlebar mustache. But you think of guys too, like Evan Gaddis, when he was in, I mean, he was correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't he a janitor in Georgia, if I'm remembering right? I mean, he was a full-time janitor that's played in the major leagues and won a World Series. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, it was. I do believe that's correct. So it's crazy how all that goes, but hopefully, like you said, we see something soon. And then the last recent thing that I wanted to discuss here was the mini Twitter craze about Clayton Kershaw being at Dirk's number retirement game. I think people took that way out of context. He just lives in Dallas. His family's here. Obviously, he's going to go support Dirk in a game like that. It's definitely not a bad thing, but it doesn't provide any sort of omen that he's going to sign here. I do remember that Chris Woodward had been in contact with him not too long ago. So I'm sure they're, still discussing things, but not really anything can even happen until the lockout is over. So we'll see how that goes. I'd love to have him here. I don't know how you feel about that, Tyler, but I think that would be a great addition.
Yeah, I had written about it not too long ago. I would sign Kershaw to a 3-year, $70 million deal. I mean, keep him around for a few years, depending on what he wants to do. I know he wants to go back, be with his family. I know he just had another kid. Be able to take the kids to school, but stay in his own backyard. If baseball is still in the cards for him, he would be a perfect fit for the Rangers. With guys again like Leiter, Wynn, Ricky Vanasco, and Owen White. He's the perfect guy, and you pair him with John Gray, pretty formidable top of the rotation for a team that ranked in the bottom half as far as most of the major pitching stats last year.
Yeah, and I would think similarly as well, probably a 2 to 3 year deal because, like you said, we got all these guys coming up, so you don't want to have them there too long and taking a spot of one of these younger pitchers, but you do want him there because he's still good, and obviously he provides that veteran leadership and can kind of teach the other pitchers, show them the ropes a little bit. So I think that would be a good deal, and we will talk about more of what the Rangers will do or could do after the lockout a little later in the show here. So next, we did want to go ahead and talk about the MLB draft for 2022. And I'm not too familiar with it, but I know, Tyler, you've been keeping up with it a little bit. So what pick do the Rangers have in 2022?
So the Rangers are looking at the third overall pick. Obviously, they picked second last year. We're dropping down a pick, but there's a lot of really, really good talent at the top of this year's draft. A lot of young talent. I've got the top 100 draft prospects, and out of the top, I believe 10, we're looking at 7 or 8 teenagers. So there's a lot of really young talent at the top of this draft. I mean, the Rangers need some outfield depth. I think they could look at a guy like a Drew Jones and Elijah Green at that third pick. The guy I would really like to see him take pair Josh Young's brother with him. I mean, you could see Jace Young, the other Texas Tech Red Raider, Josh Young's little brother. He's got a really, really good bat. I mean, good opposite field power. He generates a lot of power to the pull side. He's got kind of a fringy arm. He plays second base, but he's also played a little bit of third in college. Obviously, with the right development, you can see him out in left field. So there's some outfield depth. You can move him around a little bit. But that's the guy I'd like to see the Rangers take. Advanced bat. He could move through the system pretty quickly. And, I mean, that's just a really good story to see the young brothers in Arlington.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. And I kind of do remember hearing about Jace now. But I would think that for the next like 7 to 10 years, they're not really going to pick too many second basemen or shortstops after the 2 signings, obviously. But yeah, I agree. They definitely could use some outfield depth. And as always, they tend to get a handful of like high school pitchers and some prep school pitchers. So you can never have enough pitching, as I always like to say.
Looking at the guys at the top of this draft list, the guy that, oh man, no joke. I was looking here at the top of the list. The guy that stuck out last year was Elijah Green. He seemed like he was the unanimous number 1 pick this year. He's 18. I mean, he's gotten some pretty elite comps. I mean, we've seen some Ronald Acuna comps. He's got real talent, but you look at guys like the emergence of Tamar Johnson, the second baseman. Good pop. He got an above average hit tool, good runner. He's got some raw power that you could see. He could definitely move out of the outfield. But Drew Jones right now, the high schooler out of Wesleyan, Georgia, and he's I believe he's the son of Andrew Jones. I mean, that's Hall of Fame experience coming at the number one overall pick. What we think would be the number one overall pick. They've got a lot of options. If any of those guys follow the Rangers, we'd be happy with them too.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask about because I do remember hearing about him as well. I think he is the son of Andrew Jones, so that's exciting stuff. And is it? I guess it would be Baltimore has the number one pick. Them or the Pirates, maybe. I'm not too sure what the standings were last year.
Yeah. So the draft order right now is Baltimore, Arizona, Texas, Pittsburgh, Washington. So that's your top five. So Baltimore, from my understanding, has been pretty high on Jace Young. Wouldn't be surprised to see him go first overall. But if it was like last year, the first couple picks signed guys below slot guys. So like a Henry Davis when Pittsburgh, the catcher that Pittsburgh took first overall last year, he was a way below slot guy. So you could see some of those top talents drop to number 3 and see if the Rangers make a big move like that with an Elijah Green, a Drew Jones, one of those guys.
Yeah, and I always say, as many people do, you just got to take the best available player, regardless of if it's a position that you were looking for, especially when you're talking about top 3 picks. It's something that you don't want to have to do a lot, right? Because the indication there. But when you do get that chance, you got to take it. And that's what they did last year. They got Jack Leiter. They were able to sign him as well because there's an issue with his Vanderbilt teammate, Kumar Rocker. And I don't know what his situation right now is, if he's going to be up in the draft again. I don't think he'll get picked as highly anymore. But I digress. It's definitely exciting that they have the chance to make another huge pick, kind of something like what the Astros did in the early 2010s, right before they just completely took off and then fell back down because of the cheating. So I take that jab anytime I can. But we'll see what they can do. So is there anyone else in like the later rounds that you were kind of looking at? I know people don't seem to talk about anything past the first round too much, but those can be sometimes more important.
Yeah. You know, as far as the later rounds, I would look at the college ranks. I think the Rangers probably look at a younger guy with that 3rd overall pick. As far as the later rounds, I mean, any college pitcher would be all right. Somebody you can kind of rush. I don't want to say rush through the system, but you can get him on the fast track to the big leagues. Somebody that dropped quite a bit is Judd Fabian, the outfielder from Florida. He's sitting at 45th right now. He was a projected top 10 overall pick last year. He's dropped significantly. He's still only 21. A lot of pop in his bat. I mean, he looks kind of like Joey Gallo. He's got some swing and miss in his game, but there's another advanced bat the Rangers could look at too later in the draft.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's all great stuff. And with college baseball starting up here soon, we'll get a better idea shortly of how things will end up panning out. So exciting stuff all around there. And the next thing I did want to cover as well, kind of the complete opposite end of the draft, is the Hall of Fame voting, because it's in full swing now. And so far it's panning out to be quite interesting. I don't know how much you've kept up with this, Tyler, but as of right now, if the voting were to end today, David Ortiz, Barry Bonds, and Roger Clemens would be Hall of Famers.
Yeah, and that's what we're looking at as far as there's 138 public votes or public ballots out right now. Like you said, Barry Bonds is sitting at 80% of the votes. Clemens is right under 80%. Big Papi is sitting at 83%. I mean, there's some guys on there that I'm legitimately surprised that haven't gotten some more love. You're looking at a guy like Billy Wagner. I mean, one of the greatest closers of all time. Sheffield, even though he's got some PED connections. One guy that I'm pretty high on is Jeff Kent. I think Jeff Kent hadn't gotten the love of arguably the best power hitting second baseman in baseball history. I think he's a for sure Hall of Famer, but that's why I also don't have a vote. So
yeah, and on the topic of voting as well, I personally get very frustrated when people submit empty ballots, because that's the other thing I had up on my screen here. There's been like 4 or 5 just empty ballots, and I don't understand that. You get the chance to vote. It's something that you have to earn the ability to vote, and then you just leave it blank. I don't know how to feel about that,
Well, I understand, you obviously have to put in your time to be able to vote for the Hall of Fame, to receive a ballot, to be able to have that kind of power. But I'm right there with you. To leave the ballot empty just seems like a waste. These guys are on there for a reason. They have these really illustrious careers, and match up with, some of the greatest baseball players that ever lived. And you're looking at like the top 1% of all baseball players that have played the game that go into the Hall of Fame. To have that kind of power, and to say a guy like Jeff Kent, or a guy like Bobby Abreu, or a Tim Hudson, even a Barry Bonds or Roger Clemens, guys like that, to be able to hold that power and say, you put up arguably the best couple seasons of any position player or any pitcher in baseball history, and you say, nah, I won't give you the time. I'm just going to leave you off. I'm going to leave all of you off. I mean, I think that's a waste of power. I think I think you should be required to pick at least 5 guys. Doesn't matter who you pick. You could keep a guy like a Torrey Hunter on the ballot, a Joe Nathan on the ballot. You don't have to vote for the PED guys, or however you view that. But I think you ought to have to vote for some of these guys and give them a fighting chance.
I agree. And I've seen people, I think it was particularly last year, or whenever Derek Jeter got in, there's at least 1 or 2 people that only voted for him. And I think that's at least better than voting for nobody. Because if on this list, for whatever your reasons may be, that you think Derek Jeter was the only guy that's worth it, then that's fine. At least you voted for someone. So that's how I view that. And then on top of that, with this year, Ortiz, Bonds, and Clemens, how are you not going to vote for the other PED guys? Hey, me from the future real quick. This was one of the points where it cut off really badly, so I switched to my phone audio, and that's why the audio changes. So I just wanted to say that I really appreciated Tyler bearing through the technical difficulties with me here today, and enjoy the rest of the podcast.
So yeah, my point with that is just if you vote in Ortiz, Bonds, and Clemens, then it should open the floodgates for the other guys that have been at least accused of PEDs or whatever the situation is. I don't understand how you only vote for those 3, but that's just my opinion.
Well, you look at guys like Barry Bonds. He was the most feared hitter of his time. Just hands down. There's no argument there. But with that link, like you said, if you vote a guy like Barry Bonds in, Clemens has to get in. You've got to vote a guy like A-Rod in. Because A-Rod was the best shortstop of his time too. There's no sense in trying to leave these other guys out. If you vote, arguably, from the information that we have as fans, the biggest steroid user of all time, other than Jose Canseco. I mean, that's just it's just fact of the matter. Now, Canseco's never going to get in. I don't think. I mean, he doesn't. I don't think he deserves to. But Barry Bonds was the greatest outfielder of the time. Just hands down.
Yeah, and that's been my point is, you can take all the steroids you want, but you still have to be able to hit a baseball. And as you mentioned, he just had an intimidating presence that was unlike anything that people have seen, at least in the last like 50 years, maybe since Babe Ruth himself, you know. The only knock I have on Bonds apart from the PEDs is, I think it was 2004, I want to say, where he beat Adrian Beltre for MVP, but it was also like one of the best seasons in MLB history, so it wouldn't have made sense for him to not win MVP. But that's the closest Beltre got to winning an MVP.
Right. No bias here, right? No bias.
No, that's just objective, man. You so
Well,
that will be interesting when
while we're
he
on the
gets on
Hall
the
of Fame.
ballot. All right, go ahead.
Because I was going to say, well, bouncing off Beltre there, I mean, he had the best like 5 years in LA. He goes to Seattle. He gets lost because Seattle to me is almost, or it was almost a place for you to go for your career to die. You look at a guy like Sean Figgins. Nobody remembers Sean Figgins, but he was an all-star. He goes to Seattle, career toast. Beltre signs that 1 year deal in Boston, all-star year, the big deal with Texas. The rest is history. I don't know if he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, arguably the greatest third baseman defensively to play the game of baseball. He is a Hall of Famer in his first 5 years, I think. But what I was going to say is, while we're on the topic of Hall of Famers, the Rangers have 10 guys that played for them on this list. And the one that I think that has the best shot of getting in should be Mark Teixeira.
Yeah, and that's what's crazy is he has 0.7% of the votes right now, or 0.7% of people have voted for him. So he's not even in the territory to stay on the ballot.
What's crazy is that of the votes that have come in, he has one vote.
Oh, so that's just one person. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he has one vote in his first year. And what sucks for Teixeira is I don't know if because he was a great defender, arguably one of the top 5 most balanced switch hitters in all of baseball. I think doing some research on him, I think the only guys ahead of him were like Mantle, Posada, guys like that. I mean, historically incredible switch hitters. And I think he sat at 4th on this list with guys like Chipper Jones following him. So it would be a shame to not see Teixeira in the Hall of Fame when he ranks among the game's best.
For sure. And especially with basically switch hitting is dead, more or less. So the fact that he was at that level for his whole career is insane. The only switch hitter I can think of right now is Lindor, I think. And he's no Teixeira.
Oh, absolutely not. Lindor is good in his own right. Oh, yeah. But what Teixeira was able to do as far as a power standpoint, I mean, it's unmatched in baseball history unless you go back to, say, a Mickey Mantle, who, I mean, he's one of the greatest to ever play the game. I mean, that's why he's in the Hall of Fame. He wore the pinstripes. He's a legend. He's a legend in baseball history. And I think if you put a guy like Mantle in there and you see the similar numbers that Teixeira put up, I mean, you got to give him a chance.
Yeah, that's kind of what they've been doing with Mike Trout too. Like they'll put up 2 sets of numbers and say which one's Mike Trout, and his is always the better ones. It's compared to like Mickey Mantle or something, something crazy like that. I also found it disappointing that nobody's voted for Prince Fielder. I get it; he's not in the top 10 of this list, but I'm surprised that nobody has voted for him.
To me, Prince, as great of a career as Prince had, to me, his numbers just don't add up to me as a Hall of Famer. And I'm not saying he didn't have a good career. But a guy like Prince who was one of the most feared power hitters in the 2010s. The 2010s and a little into the 20, up about till 2015. I mean, I would expect better power numbers from him. He had a good average, things like that. He's a pretty balanced player, but to me, his numbers just don't jump off the page when it comes to presenting his case as a Hall of Famer. So I get why there's some hesitation with Prince. That's a shame. He's a fan favorite, things like that. He's really loved by his teammates across the league. But to me, in my opinion, Prince is not a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately, with the way his career ended is really what killed his chances of ever getting in. Because if he played the last 4-5 years, whatever was left on his contract, and didn't have the health problems, then I think he's at least a borderline case, because he would have had over 400 home runs more than likely. And like you said, his average has always been good, but I get it too. He's not top 10 on this list, and you only get up to 10 votes. One of the more interesting ones, though, Joe Nathan, 2.8%. And then Tim Lincecum is also 2.1%. I'm surprised that anyone's voted for Tim Lincecum, to be honest with you.
Well, Lincecum had an incredible career with San Francisco. I mean, once he left the Bay Area, his career went downhill. But what made Lincecum such an interesting case was he was a little guy. He had attitude. He had some really herky-jerky mechanics. I mean, he didn't look like a guy that should have big league success, but he did. And again, I don't think his numbers justify him being a Hall of Famer. I see why you'd give him a vote. But to me, Lincecum isn't a Hall of Famer, but not to say that he didn't have a great career as a Giant. Incredible career. To me, he doesn't. To me, he doesn't deserve to be up there with the likes of Nolan Ryan, Sandy Koufax, and some of the greater pitchers that have stepped on the bump in the game of baseball.
Definitely. And if he did ever get in, he'd obviously go in as a Ranger with his 1 month run here.
Right, on a minor league deal. Yeah, it's pretty solid to see him go in as a Texas Ranger. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned Joe Nathan too. A lot of people don't realize that Joe Nathan started out in the starting rotation for Minnesota and San Francisco. And he had great numbers. I don't want to say great. He had good numbers in his time with Minnesota. But for whatever reason, when he signed with Texas in 2012, he was 37 years old and had the 2 best seasons of his career in Arlington. Keep in mind, in the old ballpark where the ball would fly. I'm looking at his time in Texas. He had 151 strikeouts, 80 saves in 133 games, and his ERA in Texas was just a hair over 2. He was a 2-time All-Star, and he finished the 2013 season in Texas with a 1.39 ERA. The guy was incredible. Now his career tapered off, obviously, when he hit 39, 40. I think the last time he pitched was in 19 with the Giants, but there's a case to be made for Joe Nathan. Again, he's not like an overpowering pitcher. He wasn't ever that feared closer, but he was an under the radar, extremely valuable closer for a number of years.
Yeah, I can see the case for him as well. And the last player that I did want to talk about before we move on to.
Hey, me again. Obviously, it cut out there. I was going to say the last player I want to talk about was Scott Rowland before we moved on to looking ahead to after the lockout. So it cuts back here to Tyler talking about Scott Rowland, and that is who I was trying to say before it cut off. So back to the podcast again. This was the last time it cuts out, though, so you won't be hearing from me from the future again.
Scott Rowland, in my opinion, is a I mean, he is a Hall of Famer, and it's taken way too long for him to get in. Whether he gets in this year or next year, he's still got 5 years left on the ballot. But you look at the guy, he's got a 70 career WAR, which is unreal. Now, his power numbers, they don't jump off the page. 316 career homers and a 281 average. But people forget how good of a defender he was. The dude won 8 Gold Gloves. He was a 7-time All-Star. He was a Silver Slugger, and he won Rookie of the Year. And all that while playing elite defense in the National League. I mean, he had a couple of years in Toronto, but the guy was unreal for almost 20 years in the big leagues. And to have that level of sustained success, you're no doubt a Hall of Famer in my mind. Again, it's taken him too long, and he just needs a little bit more support. I mean, he's so close, and we got to figure out a way to get Scott Rowland in, because he is more than deserving. As a Cardinal, as a Red, he could go in as any one of those teams, but he's more than deserving, and I think it's taken him a little too long. So that's my opinion on it. He's a surefire Hall of Famer, as much as these other guys, flying under the radar for almost 20 years.
Yeah, and if you even want to just go off what I like to call the eye test, which is just the basic home run, batting average, RBI stats, because unfortunately a lot of people just look at those. But his 162-game average is 25 home runs and 102 driven in. Average. That's insane. So that's, to me, that's Hall of Famer. Yeah, that's a Hall of Famer to me.
He was as consistent as they came for 17 years in the big leagues. And, I mean, you look at his last year, he was 37. He finished his career in Cincinnati, but in 92 games, not a lot. He hit 245 with a 716 OPS. Again, not great, but he was still productive. 8 homers. He drove in 39. He got on base. Even in the later stages of his career, he was still a very, very productive bat in the Reds lineup, in the Toronto lineup, the few years he was there. So no doubt he deserves to be in as one of the most consistent, underrated superstar defenders of the game.
100% agree. And I think there's at least a few weeks left on the voting, I remember. So hopefully he gets that last push, because he's at 71%. So he's right there. He's got to get a few more people to start voting for him, and he'll get in. But that is, I think, all we got for the Hall of Fame talk for now. And I wanted to wrap up the podcast by looking ahead after the lockout, what we think the Rangers will do. We talked about Kershaw already. I think you mentioned Suzuki. I know for me, I want them to try to get Matt Olson. I know they have Nate Lowe, but Olson, if they can get him at the right price, would be a phenomenal addition. And with him, Simeon, Seager, and Young, that's one of the best infields in all of baseball, in my opinion.
Oh, no doubt. You're talking about a really elite defensive infield. Like you made mention of it, that's arguably the best infield in baseball, no doubt. Looking after the lockout, I don't see the Rangers making a whole lot of noise. I can see them getting some rotation depth. If they go make a splash like a Rodon or Clayton Kershaw, great. Getting a guy like Suzuki shores up your outfield. You get some consistency in left field that you haven't had since David Murphy. I mean, it's been a decade since the Rangers have had a consistent guy in left field. If they're going to make a big splash, I made note of it not too long ago. I think they need to go get one of the Reds starting pitchers. They've got Castillo, Sonny Gray, Tyler Mahle. Those 3 guys are very, very productive. They're all controllable, I believe. I know Gray has, I think, 2 years. Castillo has, I think, 3. And Mahle has 3 or 4. But you're looking at a guy in Luis Castillo that, yeah, it's going to cost you quite a bit, but you're looking at an ace of a rotation that's been as good, if not better than most starting pitchers across baseball. Sonny Gray comes back to the AL West, something he's very familiar with, he's comfortable with in a big ballpark. And I don't know a whole lot about Tyler Mahle, but I know he's controllable. I know he had the best season of his career last year. And why not? Why not try and sell on somebody's upside? So that's the moves that I could see the Rangers making. If not, go sign a back of the rotation guy, maybe a Tyler Anderson. Shore up the rotation with a pretty cheap option. But that's where I see the Rangers going after this lockout ends, whenever it ends. So.
Yeah, and that's as we talked about at the beginning, that's the other factor. If it ends when pitchers and catchers report, they might not really have time to sign someone or trade for someone. But if it ends tomorrow, they got time. So that's a huge factor in all this as well.
Everything that I've been hearing about the lockout ending is the same, that is going to be the same as what had happened the week before. We're going to look at just a frenzy of moves across the league. Obviously, the Rangers spent $500 million in 2 days. There were guys on the move this way, that way. I mean, it seemed like every 30 minutes we had breaking news of somebody signing somewhere, somebody getting dealt somewhere. That's kind of the information that I'm hearing about what this end of the lockout's going to be. And that's why we hope and we pray that this thing ends like a month before spring training starts. So we have some time to get all that settled, let the dust settle, things like that. And then we can go fresh into the 2022 season. Again, all that's still up in the air, but I would imagine it's going to be a pretty busy couple of days as soon as the lockout ends.
Yeah, and to that note, I'll tell you, the day that they signed Corey Seager and Simeon, as the most I've ever posted. I think I was just constantly having to post stuff because there was some development or something. But to your point as well, they do need to allow time for things to settle. And I do think there will also be that similar kind of explosion, maybe not as much because some of the big guys are off the table, but there's still Correa out there. I don't know who's going to take him because I don't think the Astros want him back. But there's still some big stars out there that don't have a team. And I don't know. We mentioned it already, but it's just such a mess. I think as well, like you said, that they'll probably get some back end rotation guys. There's not much else they need. They just need to solidify some outfield depth, clean up their rotation a little bit, and then depending on how much they really want to compete this year will determine what kind of moves they will make. The two big ones kind of set up for the future. But I think 2023 is when they really are going to turn it up to level 10 here because they'll have Leiter up. They'll have all these young guys fully in the lineup and in the roster. And that's when they really need to go all in my opinion.
And I agree with that. I think 2023 is kind of where their contention window opens up. I'm looking here at some of the free agents starting next year. We're looking just at the rotation. Bauer, David Price, Chris Sale, DeGrom, Syndergaard, Morton, Evaldi, Nola, Luis Severino. I mean, those are the guys that are topping the free agent starting pitching market. I mean, we're not even talking about position players. There are some really, really good players that are going to be on the market next year. Arenado, JD Martinez, Xander Bogaerts. I mean, there are some really, really talented guys that are going to be on the open market next year. Again, take a step back, see how this year plays out, get some depth, let some of your young guys develop. And like you said, by 2023, now I don't think that Leiter will be up this year. I think that they'll give him a full year in the minors. But think about 2023. You're looking at a rotation of, we'll just say hypothetically, the Rangers don't get Clayton Kershaw here. You're looking at Gray, Dunning, Wynn, Leiter, maybe a Ricky Vanasco, maybe Taylor Hearn, maybe a Colby Allard. I mean, they've got ridiculous pitching depth. And then you got Josh Young that can come up. Sam Huff will have a full year back at catcher. This core is going to be really, really strong in 2023 that you can add to. You can use some of that middle infield depth, some of that a little bit of that pitching depth, maybe trade for a guy like Matt Olson. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, there's so many moves the Rangers can make in the offseason following this one. So I think the Rangers stand pat, get a little bit of depth, let your young guys develop. In 2023, you'll see those young guys come up, and the future of Rangers baseball is going to kick it into another gear. And hopefully we see our own World Series championship come to us in the Globe Bluff Field, sorry.
Yeah, that is a big thing as well, is you don't want to get too far ahead. Like, let's say in some hypothetical universe, the Rangers become the Yankees and they get Olsen and they get Castillo and they get Castellanos and they get all these guys. And then they don't even do anything in the next 2 years, right? If you get too far ahead, you're not building the team properly. So I would agree on that they need to see how this year goes. They made one big splash, and if they're trending in the right direction, which I would say if they get close to being at 500, that is trending the right way, then you can make another big splash next year and get some of those from that huge list of free agent pitchers that you just named, and whatever position players they want to try to get.
Right. The important thing here is we've seen it time and time again across Major League Baseball. These teams want to rush these prospects to the big leagues. That's why Young didn't need to come up last year. I think you give him a couple months again this year. What if he struggles? We've got Kiner Falefa. Wynn struggled in AAA. Let him get his feet underneath him. Leiter, we don't know. Leiter hasn't thrown to live hitters, since the College World Series. I mean, he hasn't seen in-game action for almost a year. That's just the fact. You got to let him get acclimated, let that core build, and when they're ready, I mean, then you've got your veterans, the guys on the big contracts. You've got your young guys. That's the makings of the team. But like you said, you can't – we've seen the Dodgers the last couple of years, the Yankees. You can't buy yourself a championship. It's not how that works. You've got to have depth. You've got to have quality pieces up and down the organization. And right now the Rangers do. You just have to give them some time to really develop and see what you've got, and then go add to that core. Add a Olsen, add a veteran starting pitcher like a Castillo, a Kershaw, maybe next year a Bauer, a Syndergaard, if Syndergaard stays healthy. And if Bauer can get over all of his allegations that he's dealt with. We'll see what happens. This will still be a really exciting year for Texas. I think fans are overlooking that. They're going to be bad. They'll be a lot better, though. And they're a team that people want to go watch. So we'll see how this year plays out, but we'll see a playoff contending team starting in 2023 and beyond.
For sure. And I would say to the fans, like I was just mentioning, if they get close to 500, I call that a win. As long as they're trending upward, for sure less than 100 losses. But if they're getting in the right direction and seeing how the young guys pan out, but I think that is a perfect place to wrap things up here. We talked about a lot today, and I appreciate you joining us, Tyler. Is there anything else you want to say to the people? Plug your social media, all that stuff.
Oh, man, I just appreciate having the opportunity to come on and talk a little bit about what I love so much. I live and die by the Rangers. I've seen them when they're bad. I've seen them when they're good. And it's something that I'm passionate about. If I can share that passion, that love of baseball and Texas Rangers baseball with people, I mean, that's what I'm here to do. And so thank you for having me on. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. But, yeah, if you want to follow my stuff, I'm on Twitter at @PTylerHenderson. You can see some of my stuff that I do here locally. May not apply to everybody, but there's some pretty interesting stories that come out of West Texas. I do post all my baseball stuff on there. I like to have a lot of baseball conversations on there. So if you have any questions, hit me up that way. I like to hear your trade requests, things like that. See what the community has running through their mind about how these Rangers are going to do. If you want to see some of my personal stuff, I'm on Instagram, Tyler Henderson 2, just the number 2. Get a little look into my personal life and see who I am. I love talking about my faith. I love talking about baseball, and we'll see how that goes. And if you want to give me a follow, come on over. I'd love to meet you. I'd love to get to know y'all a little bit because I want to share my loves and passions with y'all. And so I'd love to hear y'all's back at me. So again, I appreciate you having me on, and hopefully we can do it again soon. And maybe we'll have some actual games to talk about.
Yeah, that will be quite the day when this lockout ends. But thanks again for coming on, and thanks again to everyone for listening. Be sure to go check out Tyler, all the stuff he does. And we'll be sure to definitely have you on the podcast again, man. It's been fun today. Yeah,
man, it has been. What a way to start a Saturday morning and talking some Rangers baseball. It's a beautiful day, and Rangers baseball makes it just a little bit better. So again, I appreciate you having me, and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks again to the listeners, and we'll be sure to talk to y'all later.
So there you have it, y'all. That was my discussion with Tyler. It was a great time. And like I said, we covered a lot. It was fun, and I certainly want to have him on in the future. But hopefully y'all enjoyed that. This is the longest episode I think I've done. I mentioned that at the beginning as well. But it was cool, I haven't done one of these in about a month. So I figured this would be a good way to come back. I didn't want to just release them for the sake of releasing them, because I already did an episode where I just talked about nothing, basically. So I'm looking for some player interviews as well. Just give you all a little preview of that. And hopefully those come to fruition before the season starts, but there's not really an outlook on the season starting right now, so who knows. However, I appreciate y'all listening, especially if you made it through the whole thing. It's a long episode. And let me know what y'all want to hear in the future. Check out my YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. And with that being said, I will talk to y'all later.